So I want to know the real value, all right? So he spent 2 kgs of apple he spent at rupees 140 per kg is equal to rupees 280. That is the nominal income to him and my nominal expenditure. The real expenditure is this total expenditure. If I divide it by prices, I get real expenditure or real income from his point of view, seller's point of view, which is 280 divided by 142. In this case, it is measured in terms of 2 kg of apples. All right? In case of national income, therefore, you can see what I am arriving at. You need a measure of prices which you would use to divide the national income, and you get the real income, real national income. All right? So we need a measure of prices. The problem is there are millions of goods, so millions of prices. In fact, one good somebody pointed out in the very beginning when I was talking about we need to add the market price value of goods. Somebody says, sir, market price to ek goods ka kitna hota hai? And throughout the year, market price can keep on changing. What will you do? Which market price are you talking about? Well, you have to find out which one. Statisticians decide that. Sometimes they take an average value. Sometimes they take a representative value, which is not necessarily average value. They think the Ahmedabad price is the most representative one. But there are prices which are higher or lower than the Ahmedabad price. All sorts of things. This is the statistician's decision, the judgment he uses. We need not get into that. Point is that there are prices, and even one good has many prices. So how would you measure price then? This is what I'm going to get into. Because unless we know prices, we cannot determine the real value. All right? Here, to get the real value, we need the prices. Total expenditure wouldn't have done. Total expenditure is like total income. So if I have total income of a country, suppose I have national income using the income method, or market price valuation of GDP, if I have that, or market price valuation of GNP, we need to have some measure of prices to get the real value. All right. What's your question? Quite possible. Huh?
What is the significance of this real?
Significance of the real variable is to measure the real value. You are absolutely right. My income has remained the same, prices have gone up, my real income has gone down. It's quite possible. These are the things you need to know, understand. You are absolutely right. I mean, real income need not increase. A person's real income may be falling because of inflation. That's worrisome. That's a macroeconomic problem. So don't think it cannot happen. I earned the same money income 6 months back what I used to earn. In the 6-month period, prices have gone up, the goods that I buy. Not prices, the goods that I buy, those prices. All right? It may not be the country's price level. Who cares? At an individual level, therefore, my real income has fallen. Because with higher prices of the bread and the butter and the rice and the wheat that I buy and the vegetables, my real income has fallen. It's correct. That's why inflation is so worrisome. Is that your question? No.
My
Louder.
What is this, then the significance of the real income?
This is the significance of the real income. It measures the actual income level. What else can be the significance? What more significance do you want? What more significance do you want regarding real income? It's a true measure of income. You just don't say, as I pointed out, 90,000 rupees capital gains he made. Point is, actually in real terms, how much gain did he make is important. That's significant. Because with 90,000 rupees, he may not be able to buy the goods 10 years later, the amount he could have bought 10 years back. So that's the significance of real income. Now what's your problem? That wasn't a very good question. You were thinking of something else. Don't interrupt me. Then in discussion hour you take it up. You are interrupting me. Don't interrupt me if you don't have good questions. In discussion hour we will take it up. Acha. So the real income becomes very important. So people want to know that in a country national income may have grown in rupee terms. But I want to know what is the real gain to the country. Say per capita income. Have you heard of a measure called per capita income? It's simple. Total national income divided by the population size. Now you see that the per capita nominal income has gone up. Good. But I really want to know per capita real income, how much it has gone up. That would benefit, that would on an average. It's an average measure. That doesn't mean everybody has gained. But kind of an average income, how much has it increased in India? Real income again. Real national income. That's the issue. Okay. Now, I guess somewhere I have to begin this. How can I begin this? If you remember a few things I said, that a few things I said is the things like GDP or GNP when it is just written. It means it is measured at current market prices. That you have heard. All right. Now let me tell you a very interesting first, a very useful measure of a real variable, how it is done. One very common approach to measure real GDP or real GNP is the following. One very common approach to measure real GDP is the following. Now, what is happening in nominal GDP? In nominal GDP or in GDP, what you usually do is the following. You sum up all goods at a particular at the current time period like this. Where I goes from 1 to n, PIT is price of good I in time period T, and QIT is total amount of good I produced in time period T. So that is what is GDP in the country, produced by whoever. It can be produced by domestic companies. It may be produced by a foreign company, right? This is GDP. That's what I've taught you in algebraic terms. All right. The problem with this is that even if QI's quantities remain same, but most price, even if some quantities have fallen, but prices have changed quite a bit, then the GDP in the next time period will be a larger number. QIs remains more or less constant, and even some have fallen, lesser amount produced, But PIs, largely speaking, have gone up, majority of goods. Next period, GDP value would be higher. This is misleading you. This is a misleading information. Output in the economy hasn't gone up, overall output. But it shows a larger number if you use a method like this, where current prices are involved. The real value, which is the most significant value, real GDP, how much the country is producing more in an aggregate terms, in an aggregate sense, over the years, so how much it has produced today, more than the previous year, how much was produced in the previous year, more than the year before that, and how much will be produced in the next year compared to this year. If I have to have a macroeconomic data set where I can have a look on a big screen, how is Indian GDP value, real GDP value changing, which is actually India is producing more, if I want to know how much more it is producing. A very simple way to approach that problem, if you agree with me, would be to keep these prices that is used to measure the value and allow you to add them up. Because you cannot add apples and oranges, you cannot add number of cars to number of tables. They have to be converted into a common unit where you need a money value or something. So prices have been used. But suppose I tell you, as a solution to this problem, to find out in real terms how much more is produced, I can do in case of multiple goods, just not apples are produced, but multiple goods are produced, millions of them are produced in the country. If I can keep the prices constant, but prices are still allowing me to convert the physical volume of output of chairs and automobiles and fans and whatever into a nominal value where I can add them in a common unit, then I have solved the problem. Because then year after year, any change in GDP value would be reflected through overall changes in the Q value and not the P value. P is held constant. This is called using the base period prices. So using constant base period prices is called the base period, one period in the past, which is the base period, with which we compare the numbers in future, all time periods. And I hold that base period price constantly. So all goods are still multiplied by the prices which existed in 1992-93 or 93-94 or 89-90 or whatever. That is also a statistician's problem, which should be the base period. Once they take the base period price, then using base period prices, I can compute the real GDP. One can obtain, which is known as constant GDP. Constant means the prices have been kept constant. It's not called GDP anymore, because GDP is at current market prices. I can obtain constant GDP as sigma I equal to 1 to L P0 period is the base period. I, and then I have Qi T for all T. For all time periods, I can do that. Alright? This is what I'm trying to tell you. When you have multiple goods, the real GDP is obtained like this. It is not in physical terms, because physical terms you cannot add many goods. You can only talk about physical terms, one good, apples or oranges. But you have apples, oranges, bicycles, spectacles, shirts, pants, watch, pen, everything. They have to be in rupee terms still. But still it is called a real value because it reflects only The value that would change over time, keeping that in mind, that time perspective, is in the physical quantity of goods, the way they are changing. And therefore it reflects the real GDP. So this is called, constant GDP is essentially the real GDP. And this uses a method which is very simple but very effective. It keeps the prices constant. So you have to evaluate the goods in the current period or any time period. How much actually physically has been produced in a sector, in an industry. Multiply that by the price that existed in one time period. Then you have when you have a series plotted and shown on a mega screen, you know exactly how Indian real output or real income or whatever, I'm coming to real income and other variables, I need to measure prices later, has been moving, has been changing. How does it look? And it is not going to confuse you or misinform you with respect to how much GDP change has occurred, which is very important for macroeconomics to know. How much more the country is producing today as opposed to, in comparison to yesterday or day before. It's very important to know that. So this is what you look at using a base variable. This is called real GDP. Now that I have said that, this real GDP business, now I can tell you the first most cumbersome measure of prices in the following manner. The first measure of price level, it emerges from this real GDP. The simple example again, we call that if nominal expenditure, if nominal is equal to P into Q, all right, then it clearly follows that price is equal to the nominal value divided by Q. Cross multiply. Okay? All right. Nominal value divided by the real value. Now I have real GDP here, constant GDP. I have nominal GDP here. So what will be the first important measure of some sort of average price in the country? Following that example, prices in the country, kind of a price level, like in the seashore, at any point of time, at any particular place, the wavelength is something. It varies across the day. Now you want to know at that point, standing there, what is the average wavelength? All right? Now you have various points of various heights of waves. You want an average wave. You have to find out the total height of all waves at any point and form some sort of an index number with weight attached to it, how frequent the waves are, etc. All right? In this case, you tell me if nominal value is equal to P into Q, price into quantity. Therefore, price is equal to nominal value by the physical quantity. What will be a measure of price level that emerges from these two variables, nominal GDP, which is current market price GDP, and constant GDP? The nominal GDP divided by the constant GDP. You have a measure of prices. If you, by analogy, I'm talking about. By analogy, I'm talking about. Look at the number, the simple example of apples I gave you. The nominal value of expenditure on apple was price into quantity. And if you want to know the price of apples, you divide the nominal value of expenditure by the amount of apples you have bought. Then you have the price. In this case, we usually have, if I now erase all this, our first measure of prices in the country that emerges that emerges called GDP deflator first level prices that emerges, which is the GDP, which is nominal GDP divided by constant GDP. Called GDP deflator. It has a name. What is GDP deflator? It measures some prices. All right? All prices, a measure of all prices. Now, one thing you should note, in case of this multiple goods, where we had to use this cumbersome method, arithmetically is very simple, of keeping a base period price constant throughout the series. And then we arrived at constant GDP and the current GDP or simply which is known as GDP and current market prices, which we already have. And then we arrived at GDP deflator, which I'm saying is the measure of prices in the country. One thing is that whenever you write that down somewhere, or you see that is being written, the GDP deflator value is this, you will see there may be a footnote or in bracket, base period price is mentioned. And you know how they mention the base period. It's very important when the base period prices are. Then you get the series. If you change the base period, the values will change. You take one particular year as a base period, some prices existed. Numbers are different from the another year, and then you evaluate all output levels, all years, using that base period price. The numbers of all output series will be different. Has to be different. You understand what I'm saying? Because the prices are different in that year. If I choose 1993, 94 as base period and evaluate and get the real GDP value. If I use 2000, 2001 as a base period, if I use 2009, 10 as the base period, the numbers all will be different because the prices are all different. Alright? Although the physical quantities may be the same in all these years. But since the prices are different, the GDP numbers are different. The real GDP numbers. Alright. So always it is therefore mandatory to write down whenever you talk about GDP deflator or constant GDP, which is real GDP, then what is your price level? Base period. What they write here is, you will see this. This is the way, like in physics, chemistry, etc. You have a way, a method that is used to write terms, symbols, etc. that are used. Whenever they talk about GDP deflator, they will tell you within bracket 19, 91, 92 is equal to 100. This is what they will write. What it means basically is 1991, 92 prices are the base period prices. You tell me one thing. This GDP deflator value, GDP is P1T, P1T, and constant GDP is P10, Q1T. In the base period, what will be the number? 1. This 1 is actually 91, 92 is equal to 100, they're right. All they're saying is that I express this in percentage terms. If you are multiplied with 100. And therefore the 91, 92 base period prices is 1 becomes 100 when you multiply it with 100. This is what they say. This is how they write. In bracket you will see some year mentioned is equal to 100. What it means is that year prices have been used as the base period prices. You check that with business magazines, newspapers, anywhere. Tonight you can check that on your laptop. Please check that how they write it. They will fill you. So whenever real values are mentioned, always base period prices should be mentioned. Because this with respect to a particular set of prices you obtain. Otherwise GDP, GNP are all current numbers using current prices. That means they are only nominal values, not real values. Am I being clear? Everybody? Okay, very important thing I told you. So, if you look at the base period prices, when I teach national income, India's national income, I've seen there have been at least 5-6 changes in base period prices since independence. Initially, it used to be about 47-48 as the base period prices. Then it changed to somewhere mid-50s. Then it changed to 60s, then 70s, 80s, 90s. Karte 93, 94 is the last series I've seen. Now it has changed again. It has come to new millennium prices. So CSO is continuously shifting the base period. Mushkil hai ye, if you shift the base period, please give us the back numbers also. Because if the back numbers 40 years back are in 1992, 93 or 81, 82 base period price, and suddenly you are using the current numbers in another base period price, how as an economist, if I have to do an analysis, a research or whatever, going to find the correspondence between the two series? Some numbers using some base period and other numbers, current series, current numbers, last 10 years, 15 years is only in terms of another base period. This is a huge, enormous problem. Data set. Suddenly base period shifted. Okay. These are the data to collect here was on the basis of one base period, current 10-year period, present 10-year data is in terms of other base period. These problems are there and you can see why it is a problem. Yeah.
So, we are having a base period, say 90 to 93 as a base period. Back in those days, there would be some products which did not exist at all. And when they are calculating the GDP now.
Coming. Early question. Comparative study. Very good point, Madam. So you know this base period business. Alright? Now, in US, they are not using the GDP deflated value or measuring real GDP this way by using a base period price. What they are doing, every 2 successive years, they take an average of prices. Again, next 2 years, they take average of prices, which doesn't allow much of a price impact on the variable anymore. They take the average of the preceding year and the current year for any year. So they use what is known chain weighted measure of real GDP. In Mancube it is written. In US they are using a method called chain weighted measure of real GDP. Chain weighted measure of real GDP. This is what they're using. What they do, for every 2 successive years, they're taking an average of prices. So they're trying to average out the fluctuation in prices, moderate it, and use that number. And get the real value. Alright? Continuously it is corrected prices for successive periods. And then they have the real value. Current GDP is always current price. The real GDP, they take 2 years average of prices. Very small changes, whatever happening, alright? And measuring the real GDP. This is what they do. Now I come to the question that you often have, is that how do we measure inflation and therefore how do we measure prices in India? GDP deflator, you can see, can be published once a year. Once you have all the value of output, it takes a long time to come. So GDP deflator cannot be published data every week. It's very difficult. So how do we measure prices and therefore how do we measure inflation in India the way we do on a weekly basis? We report inflation value on a weekly basis. The open RBI site, Planning Commission, Ministry of Finance, whatever you can see. Inflation numbers are on a weekly basis. On TV newspaper, it comes on a weekly basis. So there are 2 popular measures in India. One is called CPI, the other one is called WPI. In US, the word WPI doesn't exist. In US, it is called PPI. So some countries are there, they call it PPI. What are these measures? 2, Consumer Price Index, I need to explain, and wholesale price index, WPI. In US, wholesale price index has another name, it's called producer price index. So we are going to talk about now two most popular price indexes. One is CPI, and then I will talk about the other one, which is known as the WPI. Consumer price index, some people say, economists say, it actually doesn't just measure prices, it measures the cost of living of individuals. It has a very limited set of goods which are called representative basket of consumption of an average consumer. If that is true, that it is a representative set of goods or a basket of goods of an average consumer, then there are so many average consumers in India. You can ask this question. There can be an average consumer in rural India, who खेती बेती करते हैं. There can be an average consumer of a worker, industrial worker, जो मजदूरी करते हैं, and there can be an average consumer like an urban consumer. Middle class income, upper middle income, or even lower middle income, average consumer. Alright? So there can be so many average consumers. Whose basket of goods are you talking about? That he typically consumes in a week or a month or a year or whatever. 2 kg chawal, 3 kg gehu, this many of other things, this much of kerosene oil they use, whatever goods. So CPI has a fixed basket of goods that represents an average consumer. Unfortunately, in India is so diverse. The rural side is so different from the urban side. And the urban middle class is so different from the workers. So what you find in India, there are 3 CPI measures, which is very logical. I thank Indian government for that, or MOSPI, or CSO. They have one for agricultural labor, they called AL, CPI. Then one for industrial worker, IW, CPI. ठीक है, जो मजदूरी करते हैं, कारखाना में काम करते हैं. And one for the urban non-manual elite like us, middle income, upper middle income, or whatever, even some lower middle income. It's called urban non-manual workers. Non-manual means जो physical काम नहीं करते, non-manual. So there is the urban non-manual. So there are 3 CPI values. So what they essentially do, they try to measure the cost of living. That is the price movement of these typical 3 types of consumers in India. एक खेती वाला, एक industrial worker वाला, and एक ये middle class वाला. Rich and middle rich or whatever, middle income वाला. So they construct a representative basket of goods that they consume in terms of quantities. And they use the simple, the GDP deflated method that I used, that index number approach they use. This is called an index number approach. So CPI is essentially this typical basket for any consumer, group of consumers. And what you do is that you measure that in terms of so 1 to J is the basket, fixed basket of goods. That a typical consumer consumes. Same method, nominal divided by real value. In case of multiple goods, the nominal value is in terms of current prices, the real value is in terms of a base period price, P10 decay. But the fixed baskets are there. So there is no superscript here, Q1, कोई time period script नहीं है कि fixed basket आप allowing that to change over time. We don't have that. There's nothing that is changing over time. It's fixed. But the statistician reserves the right to change the basket if consumption pattern changes, and it will formally announce we are going to change the physical composition of the basket of an urban non-manual or agricultural labor CPI basket. And not only that, the way that amounts are changing, they can also change the items. They can drop some item, include something else. They can do that. But that revision is done only by the statisticians and the people who collect data and construct the values for us. We just look at the numbers which they report to us. We don't look into all the items that have gone into the CPI basket and how it has changed. If someone doing research can do that, how the CPI basket has evolved for urban non-manual workers in the past 50 years, how has it changed? Are they having the same quantities Q1 to Qj all throughout, or Q1 is a different Q1 now than what it used to be earlier, and the amount Q1 is a different amount? I have a feeling that the urban non-manual workers who live even in Kanpur city have a very different basket of consumption, because when I look at my kids, the kind of food they like is kind of a food I didn't need 40 years, 50 years back, whatever. I didn't eat that. I had a very different food habit. These fellows at home doesn't want to have a proper dinner even. I mean, they are happy even if there is no rice or chapati. They are happy in fact sometimes. I cannot imagine having meal, dinner or lunch without rice or chapati. One of them. Even now. But these kids don't care even. So food habit has changed. So the CPI basket of an urban non-manual worker might have changed. The agricultural labor may not have changed much. So that is a very interesting issue, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm trying to tell you the conceptual framework, how it is done. So same method is used. Again, a base period, value would be 100 because you multiply this by 100 and you get a base period value. Ratio is not kept in terms of number, it is expressed out of 100 percentage terms. Usually that's what they do. So they multiply it by 100 and they say base period value is 100. You can see why base period value would be. Simply P1 not, so numerator denominator is the same number. So it will be what? Into 100 in percentage terms. So the base period they would write 91, 92 is equal to 100. उससे आपको पता चलेगा base period which one they have taken. Alright? So this is the CPI value. I will come back to your point, comparison. I need a detailed comparison. Because these three measures of price level involves various assumptions. So we are going to go in. Alright. Now, I would conclude by talking about the wholesale price index briefly before I go into a comparison. I'm going to come to that. I will just talk about the wholesale price index a little bit and then go into a comparison. The wholesale price index, if you want to look at the items included, I can supply you some information, I can tell you very clearly. Has a much longer list of items in India. Number one. Is the same method used. Once they are fixed, these are called weights. Once they are fixed, sometimes they may have a weight attached to this. So Q1 is the type of good with A1, small a1 a weight. Where weights A1 to AJ will add up to 1 or 100 or whatever, depending how you have expressed the weight. Alright? So they may not have just a physical quantity, but the amount has a weight attached to it. The type Q1 represents the type of dhoti, Q2 kerosene, Q3 rice. Now the weight attached to it, A1, A2, A3, small a1 or alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, are telling you in that index, price index, how much weight is given, how much importance is given to a particular issue, depending upon consumer preferences. It's essentially microeconomic theory, consumer preferences. what is some kind of a typical consumer's preference for wheat, types of subsidies, kind of oil they use, etc. All right? Fuel, various things can go into it. The wholesale price index is very similar to this, except they have a longer set of numbers, and the consumer's direct importance is much reduced. This is consumer price index. This is all has to do with the consumer. There, the consumers in the goods that interest consumers are called primary items, and then you have fuel, electricity, etc. Fuel, electricity cost, etc. So urban costs in there. And then you have a bundle of raw materials and semi-finished goods in wholesale price index. And the total list is like 200, 300 items. Either में हो सकते 50 का नहीं है, और उधर में 300 items में, and everyone has a weight. Every good has a weight, and the weight can be decimal point also. All right? So they are all weighted, and the weights they change from time to time. WPI they adjust depending upon the importance they think. So it is the work of a statistician to find out what is important in the country, and by looking at it that it has finished goods like CPI or primary goods, then you have electricity, fuel, etc. costs. All right, in India, and then you have finished, semi-finished, and raw material. That means that what interests industry, producers. They are all included in it. All right? And a whole range of larger, longer list of numbers. And it is published weekly. That means every week the data is collected from various corners. And WASPI probably has, CSO probably has, people fixed there. They report the data on a particular date. They collect, they know where to collect it. They have decided that already. They make an average maybe of that number. Put it in the computer, through the UF computer, निकल आते हैं WPI का. But the thing is, what that basket is. WPI का basket is very different. It is not talking about your inputs. It is talking about the country's inputs. So they will take electricity costs there also, and they will take some final goods also, food items, fruits, etc. They will go into industrial goods, semi-finished goods, raw materials, all right, which industry is using as their consumption, not your and my consumption, not final good consumption, but intermediate good consumption.
So does this pay include services also?
Yeah, it can include services also. I've forgotten the CPI list. Shall I try to get it and give it to you? Maybe it would interest you. What are the items involved? It would vary from country to country. Every country decides what will be in their CPI, what will be in their WPI. Remember, in US it is not WPI, it is PPI, producer price index. So it's very different, WPI. But the method is same. So the first method I gave you was the GDP deflator, which you enjoyed, I guess. The same methodology I'm following with limited number of goods, CPI and WPI. WPI wholesale price index, one thing you have noticed compared to CPI, it includes a number of industrial products, just not consumer products. Therefore, this price index is most relevant to industry. All right? But consumers also pay attention to it. But to be honest with you, the true price level that is relevant to consumer is consumer price index. But newspapers, etc., journals, the fashion is, or the trend is, the practice is not to report CPI value, the cost of living. For you and me, most important is CPI value. This summer, some MSc economics student is doing a project trying to find out this. And under my guidance means they come and consult me, not really on a regular guidance, but a bunch of people are doing some projects. They want to do something. I said, fine. One of the fellows, two fellows, I have involved them with this. Find the difference in the numbers coming from CPI and WPI. So government, when they report or talk about inflation, any discussion on TV on inflation, all are based on WPI value. That has the largest audience, which interests people on a wider scale. But to us, consumers, the most important inflation or price index value would be CPI. All right, whichever CPI is relevant, because that measures the cost of living. So the question is that WPI, why is it relevant? Well, one thing, it includes industrial goods, is relevant to industry. Second, there's a very interesting insight into WPI's usefulness. Since WPI includes semi-finished goods and raw materials, and quite a bit of it, large chunk of it, weightage is very high. All right, the largest weightage among the three groups in WPI is probably on this. Then there is this advantage of using that price index to predict the future. Let me tell you this way. If semi-finished products and raw material prices are going up quite a bit, if the statistician observes that, and that has a reflection on the WPI value, then it is indicating that these semi-finished goods and raw materials which are going to produce finished goods tomorrow will also going to have higher prices. So it has a futuristic component in it, a content in it. It can be used to predict future price changes. All right? CPI not necessarily gives that. It's only the finished goods prices which may fluctuate for various reasons. But in this case, the cost of living, if they're going, the cost of input, raw material costs, etc. are going up, then for sure you can expect in future prices of finished goods will go up, and there will be an upward pressure on inflation. So many economists say WPI is more useful than CPI. But CPI is more useful to consumers. So far I am concerned, CPI is the most relevant value. So wholesale price index on hai. Wholesale price index is a very interesting thing. It has a futuristic component. It can be used to predict the future, what is going to happen. Because it has so much of importance to semi-finished goods and raw materials that if there is major changes in prices, then WPI would reflect that today. But also it is telling the statistician, baap re baap, tomorrow there is going to be more price increase. Because these semi-finished goods and raw materials will get converted into finished goods whose prices also will be higher, naturally. Simple logic, if costs are higher, the producer also would raise the market price. Okay. But now I want to do a comparison between CPI and GDP. Well, you are absolutely right when you said, somebody pointed out, that GDP base period price concept has some problems. Well, I'm coming to that. First of all, note that CPI compared to GDP is at a disadvantage, because CPI has selected a very small subset of goods that are produced in the country, which interest the consumer. So it has a very narrow objective to what serves the consumer, and that too they fix it year after year when they get the numbers. Well, consumers' preferences change, as I told you. If you take a long run view of 30-40 years in my life, for instance, I've seen consumer preferences shifting. Different kind of food habits, etc., clothing preferences. For instance, we used to go to cinema theater a lot. We used to fight in the line, get a ticket. We won't get a ticket, stand in a line for 2 hours to get into a movie theater. Who's that? Who does it today? Hardly anybody does it. There's no consumer preference. They sit at home, watch TV, they get a DVD, they get everything. Pirated cassettes DVDs have flooded the market. Any film which is released, immediately the pirated stuff is out. I've seen. Preferences have shifted. They go to malls these days. Arey bhai, I've never seen a mall in my life. Until recently. Okay. So, but GDP is much useful because GDP takes all goods into consideration. And if you're going to talk about prices, taking all goods into consideration is a wonderful thing. Because you are really then considering a very comprehensive price index, comprehensive measure of prices. So many people like GDP. The problem is, since GDP includes all goods, Where is the time to collect the data on all goods? It takes a long time to collect the data. All right. Next, CPI, when you talk about CPI in a country, in any country as a matter of fact, there is no restriction on CPI to include imported goods because consumers like it. Imported goods, consumers like it. You take an African country or some country where they don't produce enough, most of the things are imported. You take a small country in Europe, Luxembourg for instance, one of the richest countries in the world, small country, they don't produce everything, they import bulk of things. So their CPI would include imported goods. But if you talk about GDP deflator, GDP is all goods produced within the country, there is no import content. So imported goods won't be there. Remember, there is another difference that is coming. All right. Now, the other point which I have already mentioned, the CPI weights are fixed and the GDP deflator weights vary because every year how much is produced is taken into consideration. And because of the fixity of weights, there is something which is very important. Suppose there used to be a CPI, a good number N or J, which now has disappeared from the market this year because there has been a crop failure. However, some amount of that output is still in the market on the shelves because somebody hoarded it and they are being sold at an exorbitantly high price. Basically, the crop is not there in the market. There was a crop failure. The item is there in CPI, but because of fixity of weight, you're not going to remove it. An abnormally high price is not measuring typical consumer's consumption. If abnormally high prices are there, the consumer is not typically consuming it. It's not there in the market. Some rich people paying an exorbitantly high price is buying it. All right? Say apples. There was a crop. Apple has a huge amount of, there was a consumer preference when it is normally available. But if there's a crop failure, a few baskets are available, sold at a very high price, it's not a typical consumer basket. In case of GDP, Apple won't show there because there has been a crop failure, good thing. But in case of CPI, since you fixed it and you don't change it, it will distort the price movement of the CPI basket. There is another disadvantage of having fixed weights. All right. In typical microeconomic theory, we also say that when prices change, when the prices change, consumers have a substitution effect. What is the substitution effect? If prices of apples go up too much, consumers would look for substitute fruit products. They may go for bananas, oranges, even if they don't like that much in winter. In winter, they look forward to apples, but apple prices are too high. They would substitute away. But if you fix the weights, consumer preferences are not reflected, these changes, seasonal changes, yearly changes in the consumption basket, because the weights are fixed. So CPI is not a good measure, all right, because they will not reflect the substitution effect. Now I come to his point. There are 1980, 81, for instance, when I was coming out of university and trying to go for higher studies, 79, 80, around that time, there were no computers in India. So I remember how nervous I got when I first saw a computer. And I was given an assignment on computer. My goodness, I haven't seen a computer. I've been asked to solve an assignment on computer. How the hell am I going to do it? Anyway, those days they used to use cards. Now imagine Indian output. No computers sold, no computer price, but the base period price is 1980-81. In mid-90s, when computers have come, has entered the Indian marketplace, what base period price are you going to use to compute the real value of GDP? Because in 80-81 there was no computer. But they were reporting numbers. So what they would do, which is the question you had, if a good didn't exist in the base period, but now it exists, they would try to look for an international price, convert that into Indian currency price by looking at similar goods. If international price is such and such, so much is the demand or preferences in the country, what is roughly an Indian price? Or they look for a good in India which is a close substitute. Not in case of computer, it is possible, but in case of some other goods, it may be possible, say cars, automobiles, which existed in India, a close substitute of that automobile, what price would have been there? So, statistician's problem. GNP, GDP conceptual framework I may be talking about a lot, but the statistician really has the final say and also has the nightmare of crunching the numbers out for these variables. Because so many compromises, so many assumptions, so many difficulties he has to finally get the number for you, which we look at it and say, inflation is going up in India, inflation is good, not such a bad number after all. But to come to that point, even if you have this conceptual framework, there are many, many problems with these variables. Final point, neither GDP nor CPI, take into consideration the qualitative changes that are taking place. They only look into the quantities that are produced or quantities demanded. How about the qualitative changes that are taking place? TVs used to be like this. TV prices have fallen. Has quality fallen? Quality has gone up. TV prices have fallen. Does it mean the TV has become less valuable? Not at all. So qualitative changes in variables, जो आप clothes पहन रहे, जो watch व्यवहार कर रहे, जो AC काम कर रहा है, जो इधर में काम नहीं कर रहा है आज, qualitative जो change होता है, so what will you do with the qualitative changes? It's very difficult. They do not accommodate. So they price level measures, real variable measures are very crude still. They have to make many assumptions. The problems that I just pointed out, some case fixed basket of goods are there. In some case, goods didn't even exist in the base year. In some cases, qualitative changes are taking place. In some cases, there may be an entire crop failure. The product is not there in the market, but just because it is there in a few shops and the prices have skyrocketed and some consumers are buying it, it will distort the number because it will still enter CPI unless forcefully you take the number out. Statistician, it all depends upon the statistician's preferences. Okay. One or two small points, I'm finding it unbearable to sit here. Therefore, what is the inflation rate now? Any rate, how will you calculate if you have CPI value? WPI, CPI, GDP deflator, what will be the inflation rate? What's the simple arithmetical measure? It's the inflation rate. How would the inflation rate be measured? Percentage change in prices. Why is no answer there? How is the growth rate measured? How did I say the growth rate is measured? How is the growth rate of a variable measured? YT divided by YT minus 1 into 100. You can make a percentage change. So inflation rate will be how much? CPI minus CPI T minus 1 over CPI T minus 1 into 100. Simple. This is how inflation rate is measured in India. WPI today value minus WPI is yesterday value divided by WPI is yesterday value into 100. Percentage change is the same thing as in case of growth rate of output. So inflation is not but growth rate in prices, and prices have been measured in terms of price levels, which are price indices: CPI, consumer price index, WPI, wholesale price index. Then you have GDP deflator, also a price index. All right? Okay. So this is how you would measure that. Inflation rate. But remember one thing which people forget. Suppose the price of a good was, price of a good in some year, if I draw a diagram, and this is the time period, and suppose CPI value I'm measuring. CPI value was 100 here. Then for one time period, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Suppose one time period it remained the same, and then in the 7th period it went up to a number which may be something like 100 to 200, 200, 300, 400. So you say there is a 400% inflation rate or something. Or how much will it be? 400 minus 100, 300 over 100, 300% inflation rate. You say, all right? But that's not true. Because prices have remained constant. Prices have remained constant for all these periods. And suddenly it has gone up. This is not inflation. Inflation is persistent rise in prices. So in case of inflation, the line, price line, either like this or like this have reached that point. Or like this have reached that point over time. So every period there is some increase in prices. Either in the concave shape, a convex shape, or the concave shape, whatever, or in a linear fashion. It can also go up in a linear fashion. That the prices can also go up in a linear fashion. All right? Prices can go up in a linear fashion up to that point. Then you call that inflation. So persistent change in prices upwards is inflation. Persistent change in prices downwards, if they're falling, is called deflation. All right? So one is inflation, one is deflation. But if it remains constant for a while, the chalk, and then suddenly it jumps to the same height. I'm talking about the same height, it jumps. All right? It's not inflation. That's a one-shot increase in price or two-shot increase in price. That's not called inflation. So in India, when we talk about inflation, if you notice, it is a persistent increase in prices that you call inflation. One-shot change in price, one-time change in price or something, 300%, 200%, whatever. That's not inflation. So when India talks about inflation and inflation is a problem, you will see that they talk about a positive inflation rate every period. No period is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then suddenly 300%. No. Every period they're talking about 7%, 8%, 12%, 13% increase in prices, non-zero increase. That's why they talk about inflation as a problem. Because every period there is a non-zero change in price, a positive one. Maybe 4%, maybe 10%, maybe 12%, maybe 8%. That percentage change may be going up and down, but prices are increasing continuously. I have CPI measured there. I don't have inflation rate measured here. I have CPI measured here. What I'm trying to tell you, between this point and this point, the same change in prices have taken place, two endpoints. But one path is this one, the white line. The other one's path is any of these lines. These pink colored lines are showing there's an inflation problem in the country. Because CPI value is increasing every period, so pi value, which we call pi, inflation rate is measured in terms of pi, so the pi value is changing or non-zero. It may change, it may not change, it may be constant, but non-zero. That means CPI is changing continuously. So you have CPI T minus CPI T minus 1 over CPI T minus 1 into 100. Pi is the inflation rate. Typical notation in economics for inflation is pi, Greek alphabet pi. Typical notation for growth rate in output in economics is small g. Typical notation for prices is P. Typical notation for output or income is Y. I have been using them already, but you will get habituated with it. You will get used to that. The notations are always this. The last point, you remember unemployment rate, I defined that the unemployed people divided by total labor force. I want to make one or two concluding remarks there, that if a person is unemployed, he or she cannot be a discouraged worker sitting at home not looking for a job. I had friends in Calcutta who didn't get a job, or friends, elder brothers, who didn't have a job in the 60s and 70s, I remember, who would do nothing, who will not even look for a job. Those people are not called unemployed, who are not looking for a job or are discouraged workers. A person who is unemployed is essentially looking for a job actively. He is fit enough to work if he's offered a job, all right, but he's not finding work. Remember. Secondly, part-time workers are not counted as unemployed. Part-time workers is counted, unfortunately, as employed, although they have only half the job. There is no weightage system in unemployment calculation. If it is part-time, 1/3 weight दे दो. A full-time employed जो है उसको 1 number दे दो, ऐसा कुछ है नहीं. Remember that. So part-time workers is not considered to be unemployed. He is considered to be employed, although he is not fully employed. Okay? The last point I want to mention is a very interesting thing. A few points I want to mention, and you can open Dornbusch and Fisher or Mankiw. A person is employed if he is a paid employee, like me. I am paid by IIT. I am a paid employee. All right? I am considered to be employed. But or working in his own business is also called employee. I am not paid by anybody, but working in my own business. I have my own shop. I am employed there. Another very interesting point I have, I guess labor laws vary from country to country. A person is also called employed if he is unpaid, even if he is unpaid but working in the family's business. He is still employed. So suppose your elder brother has a business, you don't get paid, you work there, he asked you to come there, you spend time from morning to evening, you don't get a salary, but you would be considered as employed because you're working there. And of course, if you're temporarily absent because of vacation or illness or something, you're not necessarily unemployed. You're absent, like you're a registered student, but you're absent for some reason. That doesn't mean you become an unregistered student, so you don't become unemployed if you are. All right? Now, an interesting related variable to employment, unemployment, and labor force is called labor force participation rate. It's called labor force participation rate. A very interesting statistics is there. Labor force participation rate. That is, if this is the total count of labor force who are above the employable age, it's not a minor. Child worker, the issue of child worker, child labor, they're not supposed to be working. So they are not part of labor force, but it's an illegal thing to do. Child labor is called a very important issue in the world. Many countries don't buy products from India because they think Indian carpet industry, Indian handicraft industry employ child workers. They don't want to buy goods from India. Achha. But a person who is of adult age, who can work, who is part of the labor force, but doesn't mean necessarily that he is either unemployed or employed. He is very much employed maybe, but he is not part of the labor force anymore. So labor force participation rate is something very interesting number. I will tell you an example. Suppose I, an adult human being qualified, maybe I have a degree like you from a good place, I can work here and earn some money or run my own business and I would be employed, but I decided not to be part of labor force. Kyun? Well, I prefer my wife should go out and work, I sit at home and do the household work. I raise my kids, like Mr. Mom. I saw a film when I was in college, Mr. Mom. What happened basically, this couple decided to reverse the role because the husband got unemployed. And the wife started working and the man in the house started looking after the kids, doing the household work, cleaning the dishes, doing the clothes, okay, taking children to bed, putting them to sleep, taking them to school, all the mom's work, the man is doing. And the film's name was Mr. Mom. Mr. M-O-M. I'm not joking, I saw a film. I will tell you you can search internet, you will get the details. I'm talking about 1980s film. Early 1980s. You will get that film. Even I remember the actor and actresses, but I've forgotten their names. So, in Western countries, a very interesting thing is happening, which is there in BanQ, actual data. The labor force participation rate is more or less steady. That is, labor force के अंदर जो actively काम कर रहा है या if they are unemployed looking for a job. But the labor force participation ratio under male and female have shown amazing trend in Western countries like US. The male labor force participation ratio is like a demand curve going down. Many men prefer to stay at home, not work, after a few years. The female participation ratio has gone up like a supply curve. And clearly there is an equilibrium like a demand-supply diagram. I thought, my goodness, what this diagram is. Then I paid attention to the table. This is in Gregory Mankiw. Open Mankiw's book in the reserve section and find out if I'm joking or not. They have actually collected numbers of labor force participation in the US. In India, it might happen tomorrow with so much of freedom for women and equality of women and women's liberation, which is very threatening for men, but you cannot help it. You will find female participation ratio going up, more female in the ministry, more female members in the parliament, more female police force, but no female at home, unfortunately. And all male are at home, most male at home, reverse roles. In US, the data is showing it. Go and check that book. First or second chapter, you don't have to go into many later chapters to search for it. So that's also another interesting number, a variable called labor force participation rate. All right? Has to do with the labor, has to do unemployed, employed, etc. They're not calling themselves unemployed anymore. They're just not there in the labor force. Usually, when do people drop out of the labor force? The bottom age of the population, when they're very young, they're not part of the labor force, or after retirement, very old. You're not part of the labor force. Okay? In between, say from 17, 18 years to about 60 years, it should be part of the labor force, but you find the actual population size and labor force participation much less. So what the hell are they doing? This is what they're doing. They earn enough, छोड़ दिया. घर में बैठे रहे थे, wife को भेज दिया. Wife is very happy, earning, because women have an insecurity. They don't earn enough. That's why you have the women exploitation in underdeveloped countries. One of the reasons is that they're economically not independent. They have to depend upon the man, and the man takes her for a ride. So, if women gets freedom and economical freedom, then it's much easier. But I don't know what else can happen. Don't ask me.